Hello and welcome to Love Lives, a podcast from The Independent where I, Olivia Petter, chat to different guests about the different loves of their lives. Today I am delighted to be joined by journalist, broadcaster and best-selling author Otegha Uwagba.
Thank you for having me. Welcome to you.
Thank you for welcoming me.
Yes, to your own podcast.
No one's ever welcomed me to my own podcast before. It's very nice. You've had such an incredibly impressive career trajectory and you started at a really young age. I want to ask you a bit about writing specifically and what drew you to it, because I know that you worked in advertising for a bit initially. So did you always want to be a writer? And what was it that drew you to advertising kind of temporarily in between?
I've always enjoyed writing or certainly more so than a lot of other people I know. And I don't think I really realised it was unusual. So I remember once, like a couple of years back, when a friend had to write something up for work and she was like, oh my God, I hate writing. And I was like, oh, okay. I just assumed that everyone felt like that. So as a kid and like a teenager, I would do I wrote like some terribly cringy poems, but I also would write like short stories and did a lot of like student journalism at like uni and stuff. But I don't think it occurred to me really. I thought I would like one day like to write a novel, but it didn't occur to me that like I could have a career as a writer. And so when I graduated in 2011, so into a recession, all I know is recessions, but that was 2011, quite a bad one. I was just like, okay, well, I need to get like a proper solid job, something quite corporate. That was kind of what everyone around me seemed to be doing. I kind of almost sort of discovered that advertising jobs exist, and then I made it my mission to get an ad agency job.
And you had quite an interesting experience in the ad agency world.
That's a very tactful way of saying I hated it. So yeah, I worked in advertising for about 5 years, always agency side. I worked at some pretty major ad agencies, and I just never really found my stride. Like I didn't really understand like the culture of ad agencies, and what I did understand of it, I didn't like it. It was also, this is pre-Me Too, pre-Black Lives Matter, so we're talking 2012 kind of onwards. And so they were just very toxic, misogynistic, gendered, racist environments, which I don't know how different it is now. I'm sure they've improved, and I've heard they've improved. I think there are still some dynamics in that industry that, kind of remain the same.
And was that experience part of what led you to writing the first book, Little Black Book, which you self-published?
So my last job was sort of the worst one. I worked at a media company that I think is now bankrupt. And yeah, as so many are. And I sort of started trying to kind of find my way into journalism, like, begging for meetings with editors and trying to pitch stuff. So I decided to like write this, handbook full of career advice, which is a fairly precocious thing to do at the age of 25. But I think it was very much geared towards people at my level and below, and a lot of it is based on mistakes I'd made. It wasn't like, oh, this is how I did it. It was like, this is what I did wrong, and now you can learn from that mistake. But also for the fact that I think I had gone quite far for my age within advertising anyway, and I'd learned a lot. And so I put just like all the stuff that I knew into that book, and self-funded the print run of like 200 copies. Like I was like running back and forth on my lunch break from this freelance job to like the printers, because it was all in Shoreditch. And then sort of miraculously, I do think, when I launched it, this book sold out in like 2 days, like 200 copies in 2 days.
So you've been in the industry for a while. Since then, you've done a few more books, you've done a few more bits of writing and journalism. How has your view of writing as a career and all that encompasses changed since you first entered this kind of sector?
I think when I entered it, I was very much thinking, I'm going to do journalism forever. And to be honest, I didn't think I was going to write a second or even a third book. I was like, I'm lucky to have gotten this one book deal, and that's just like a cool thing. I'm going to use it, to kind of leverage into other opportunities. It was quite a surprise to me that I had an idea for another book. And it was probably only kind of midway through writing the second one, which actually came out third, but it was midway through that. And I was like, okay, maybe I will be doing books, as a thing in the future, like sort of on an ongoing basis. But I think more recently, I mean, I've been thinking about it for the past few years, but I've only really started making sort of more concerted efforts to transition into it, like TV writing and fiction writing. I realized a couple of years ago, I'm somebody that gets bored quite easily. And I feel increasingly like I've kind of squeezed out as much as I want personally from kind of more non-fiction writing and non-fiction books and journalism. And so I'm sort of transitioning. It's not that I'm not going to do it at all. In fact, actually, I've just filed like a couple of pieces all this month, which is more than I've written in years, actually. So when I find a topic really interesting, I will still want to write about it. And I feel fortunate that I kind of have good relationships with editors and I can just kind of pitch stuff.
Yeah.
But I think you just need to kind of keep evolving and changing, keep challenging yourself. And, I'm working on a novel at the moment, and it started out as a nonfiction idea years ago, like literally 5 years ago. And I think when it came to me actually having space and time to explore it, I was like, I don't want to just do the same process as what I've just done, which is researching a topic, writing all my opinions on it, which, I was like, I want to try a different way of saying what I want to say, and that's how it became a novel.
Yeah, it's really fun, isn't it? I mean, I'm doing the same, like trying to transition from kind of non-fiction into the fictional space, and it's such a different way of thinking and conveying your thoughts and conveying your opinions. And I feel like, I don't know if you feel this way, but to me, it feels like some of the things that I have wanted to express in non-fiction, I actually think can only really be expressed in a fictional space because of the nuance required to convey the complexity of what it is I'm trying to say.
I feel like it just gives me a bit more freedom.
Yeah.
Because sometimes I have theories, but I don't necessarily have data to back
Exactly.
them up.
Yeah.
And I think I'm somebody who, in my nonfiction, I am like very rigorous about having things kind of backed up and substantiated. And there are some topics and themes where I'm like, I'm just going on vibes, so that is, I mean, it's a steep learning curve. I think I'm very confident in my abilities as a writer, non-fiction wise. And this is something that I need to like master in terms of the fiction space and need to get better at. Or that's how I feel about it, certainly. But that's kind of why I'm pursuing it. It is very much with a view to wanting to challenge myself and wanting to kind of flex different muscles and kind of build out my remit, seems like an overly formal word, but like portfolio as a writer, and be able to do lots of different types of writing, but fundamentally it is just the same thing, which is writing and communicating to people.
What's your relationship like with social media now? Because you've got a pretty significant following on Twitter/X. I can't bear to call it X. Twitter/X and Instagram.
When I'm on it. I've been, I deactivated my Twitter account at the end of last year.
Did you?
I then reactivated it because I think I needed someone's contact details and haven't gotten around to it. But I'm very much transitioning off Twitter because pretty much are you still on it? Like, I feel like everyone's left. Everyone's left. Like lots of people who I used to enjoy kind of seeing their opinions or communicating with on there have like fully left. So it's not as fun anymore. And I think this kind of happened from kind of 2021 onwards, when it just got so febrile during the pandemic. And I'm like a real Twitter addict, both in terms of tweeting and in terms of being on it. And I think it was a mixture of like, this isn't fun anymore, and also this is real time suck, and I get absolutely nothing out of it beyond just those hours of my life I'm never going to get back. So I think it's a shame that it has become what it has. I mean, the reason I'm kind of easing off it is just because the experience of being on there isn't the same. If everybody was still on it, and if Elon Musk hadn't bought it and ruined it, I'd probably be on Twitter right now, I think for me, my relationship with social media is just that it's a big time suck. And for instance, when I'm like really seriously on deadlines, like for books and stuff, I've been known to, give my password to friends to lock me out.
Really? For Instagram?
For Twitter. I'm not that addicted to Instagram.
Really?
Yeah. It was Twitter.
How are you not that addicted to Instagram? I would love to, because I am pretty addicted to Instagram. How do you manage that?
I just don't find it as interesting as Twitter, because I'm not finding out as much new information. Obviously, it is. I think now people are moving on to Instagram to kind of communicate the same things they would have on Twitter. But I think for the longest time, and maybe it's down to, you know, who and what I follow, but it's much more about visual inspiration there, which is nice, but can, you know, I'm not in the mood for that all the time. I just don't find it as like sticky, as like addictive as Twitter, which really kind of activates my lizard brain, and I like want to be on it all the time.
Oh God, I'm so jealous. I feel like Instagram activates my lizard brain, and I can't. I have to delete it from my phone so that I don't look at it when I'm trying to like write or something, and then I end up going back to it on my computer because I'm just so addicted. And I'm like, what are you doing? Spending all this time looking at inane stuff from people that you don't even really care about. It's just, and then I think the most wild thing to me is checking who's seen your stories.
Yeah.
Like, who gives a shit?
Or watching your own stories back.
Oh yeah, you sometimes see people doing that on the tube, and you're like, oh
really?
No. Yeah, I've seen people like looking at their own profiles before.
Well,
and then
people have probably seen me doing that.
Yeah, they've probably seen me doing it too.
The profile I look at the most on Instagram is probably my own.
But I'm like, why do we do that? What are we looking for?
I think when I do that, and I think probably when most people do that, you are taking a moment to kind of evaluate how you appear to the outside world. So you're like, oh, when somebody lands on my page, how do I come across? What do they see? What do they think of me? And I think we're constantly checking in with that, or at least that's I think how I feel when I'm doing it. But it panders to our absolute worst impulses, all of social media. And I long for the day where I fully divest from it altogether. I think that for me is the ultimate goal, but I'm still a way away from doing that.
Same. You went to Oxford. I have to ask you about Saltburn because I've seen you posting. I do, because I just love the way you think and I love your brain, and so I'm just fascinated to know what you think of the film because I know you didn't like it. And
I thought it was the worst movie I've ever seen, and that sounds like hyperbole, but I can't think of another movie I've seen that's worse than Saltburn.
Okay, what riled you up about it? What did you not like about it?
It was confused. It made no sense whatsoever, to the point where, I mean, I went to watch it in the cinema and I did sort of doze off for not large chunks, but I was kind of in and out for a lot of the first 2/3, I would say. Or I just wasn't gripped by it. I was very sleepy, which I don't think is a good sign for a movie. But I do think I was following along, and there were just significant plot holes. The characterization makes no sense. The motivation makes no sense. You know, a friend and I were talking about it and described it as, it's as though, you know, the producers of that movie or the makers of that movie kind of envisioned this scene that is Barry Keoghan dancing around to Murder on the Dance Floor in a castle, and they thought, that's going to be so cool. Let's reverse engineer an entire movie to allow that scene to happen. But then it doesn't even, it's so tonally at odds. Like, I quite enjoyed that scene, and, you know, as I think a lot of women did. But it's not just because, but also it's tonally at odds with the rest of the movie. So I'm like, the movie hadn't earned that payoff. It just was confusing. The responses to everything that happened in the movie from the characters made no sense to me. I mean, I think I can talk about it openly because it's been out for a while now. But for instance, when Jacob Elordi's character, Felix, drives Oliver Quick, the so-called scholarship boy, to, 6 hours wherever to his parents' home, and it turns out that he has been lying about his background. That for me is friendship done. That's friendship over. That person is not coming back into my car, into my life, into my house. I'm not throwing a party for them. I'm like, you're a freak. You've been lying.
And he lied about his like such big lies.
Such big lies.
His mother died. What's that?
Fucking weird lies. Can I swear on this podcast? Yes. Weird fucking lies. That's not somebody that I'd be friends with. Sociopathic lies, right? Yeah. And also, the character of Oliver wasn't in any way charming or compelling enough for me to believe that all of these people are falling under his spell, like from Felix to like the mother. I thought Rosamund Pike played that character quite well. I really liked what we saw of Carey Mulligan, but then she dies off screen. So that was a great little cameo. I was like, it's just not plausible. But funnily enough, I think it was well acted. I thought all the actors in it were really great. They did well with the material they were given. But it just made no sense. And then the kind of twist reveal towards the end of the movie that it's like, he planned it all along. He's a crazy. And I was like, well, yeah, that's kind of what I assumed.
Yeah,
like
from the
the
beginning.
setup right from the start,
Yeah,
from the
yeah,
opening scene, you're like, this guy has a secret and is a bit of a weirdo.
Well, yeah, if you've seen Talented Mr. Ripley or read the book, like you kind of know where it's going.
So I was like, this
Yeah.
isn't a twist that he like, you know, engineered all these deaths and whatever. I'm like, well, that's what I was like, oh, well, we're not supposed to think that he had killed Felix, because that's exactly what I thought happened as soon as I figured out that Felix was dead, because even that was confusing. I had to lean over to my friend and say, is he dead?
Before we move on to talk about the loves of your life, can you share with us what you are working on at the moment, writing-wise?
So at the moment, I've written a couple of features which are going to be dropping, I think, in the next, certainly by the time this is aired. I interviewed Issa Rae for a cover, which is, again, coming out very soon. Again, she's somebody that I'm just obsessed with. I love her work. And I just think she's so smart, so funny, and just everything she's written. So I was really excited about that. And I interviewed Fran Lebowitz about fashion.
Awesome.
Which was a really, really fun conversation. So I called her up, you know, down that crackly old line in New York. And yeah, we had a good old chat about fashion, and then just lots of other stuff as well, about politics and the election. And yeah, she's great fun to chat to.
Well, that leads us in perfectly to the first love of your life, which you have chosen, which is fashion and clothes. As I mentioned in the intro, you are one of my favourite dressers that I follow on Instagram and see at Fashion Week. So have you always loved fashion? Have you always loved clothes? How would you describe your style and your relationship to it?
I've always loved clothes. I've always loved clothes. It's always been really important to me what I'm wearing. I remember, like, I can literally remember, I think I must have been about 7 years old, and it was own clothes day at school. And I found that out, I don't know, I found it out like maybe the night before, or the afternoon before, and I told my mum, and I have no idea, and I was like, I don't have anything to wear, which is an absurd thing for a 7-year-old to say. I don't know how she found the time, because I literally can't remember us, like, you know, it's like she picked me up from school, and then, but somehow she magicked up this like 101 Dalmatians matching top and leg, and it's just like, it was the coolest. You know, I felt the way I walked into school the next day, like, I have got it beat, you know. So she has always, so her father was a tailor, and so he used to make like clothes and like custom clothes for like lots of people. This is in Cameroon. And so she grew up, she knows how to sew really well. She grew up making a lot of her own clothes, which, to be fair, is also just what generally happened back in like the 70s. Like, you have like a pattern and then you take it to a tailor and that sort of thing. So she's really, really into style and fashion. I think I've definitely inherited that love from her, and also that belief that what you wear communicates something about you to the outside world, and that it's a really useful and powerful tool, and often like a shorthand, but also it's just something to be enjoyed and to have fun with. And so, yeah, I've always loved fashion. It's like my biggest expenditure, probably.
Yeah, I mean, mine too. I'm interested then, was there never a part of you as a kid that wanted to work in fashion or be a fashion writer specifically and just do that?
No, that's so interesting. No, do you know what? When I was younger, I remember I used to sketch, like, I had this like silhouette of like a women's figure, and I used to sketch different clothes. I wish I'd kept them, not because I think they're any good, but just because I'd love to see what they look like now. And I would trace it out and sketch, and me and my sister used to do that. So I think at that age, but this is like 10 or like, you know, single digits, thinking, oh my God, I'm going to be a fashion designer when I grow up. But I think by the time I kind of hit my teenage years and onwards, I was like, I'm probably going to do something more, I guess, conventional or more serious, or, you know, and also it's just, a career in fashion. And then also, I think by the time I graduated, you know, when I graduated, the fashion industry was kind of at its worst in terms of it's just unpaid internships and people being treated like shit. So it didn't really appeal to me, like, working in it.
Yeah.
So I've always kind of been, I think I do more fashion work now, almost just kind of through some of my journalism, and I kind of end up falling in with, I guess, fashion brands. So I kind of can explore it. I always refer to myself as fashion industry adjacent, or like I'm a fashion hobbyist. So it's something that I kind of sometimes kind of, you know, maneuver into my work, but for the most part, it's just something that I just enjoy. And if certain opportunities or invitations open to me, then I'm happy to take them up.
And as someone who goes to the shows and goes to Fashion Week, what do you make of that kind of whole experience in its kind of modern iteration now? I mean, I'm asking you that because I'm someone who has gone to the shows for years as well for work. And I remember the first time I went to a fashion show, I was so shocked by how thin the models were. And I remember being so struck by that. And the thing that I think shocks me now more is how desensitized I am to that.
I think I'm pretty desensitized to it.
And that's what kind of concerns me.
I've only once, I'm trying to remember, I think it was a couple of seasons ago, where I remember saying to an editor outside a show, I was like, all the clothes I've seen this season just seem to accentuate skinniness. It was that kind of Y2K trend.
Yeah.
And I was just like, it makes me feel uncomfortable. It makes, like, that I think was a couple of years ago now, maybe sort of 18 months ago. And that was a time where I felt like, my God, they're really, I'm sure the models have probably always been that skinny, but it was like, wow, they're really showing it off in terms of the designers and the clothes they're making. And yeah, I think like anyone else, I think without wanting to kind of criticize an individual body type, I think it's just quite sad. And I think the older I get and the, funnily enough, kind of less I care. How do I frame this? Because I think I'm quite aware that I'm somebody who's, I guess, considered straight size. So I'm like slim. But the less kind of stock I hold in being slim or skinny, the more disturbed I am by the fashion industry's relentless focus on that. So I think probably when I was younger, in my teens and 20s, it was more a point of pride to me that my body is the size that it is.
Yeah.
And now, it's, changing, because that's what happened as you get, older, especially as a woman. The hormones hit, like, you turn 30 and it's like, oh, my body is really changing. I think essentially what I'm trying to say is that was the past few years are the first time I've ever really experienced any kind of major body insecurity of my body changing. And it's made me realize how toxic the messages and narratives we get are as women.
Yeah, I think that's what's interesting about it, is you go to the shows and it's impossible not to project your own feelings about the way you look in your body when you are constantly watching these like teeny tiny models.
Or even just scrolling through Instagram.
Exactly.
I think I get it more. I think because models on a catwalk to me are so far away from anything that to me that resembles real life that I don't actually, that isn't necessarily what makes me question my own body. It's more like what you see on Instagram, and it's like ordinary people. I'm like, oh well, that's like, look at her thighs, look at her abs, whatever. Like, I want that, and like, what do I need to do to get that? And fundamentally, I've also realized that I just can't be bothered. Like, that is the answer. But I think once I accepted that, and I kind of became more comfortable.
I want to ask you about your second love, which is voice notes. So tell me what it is you like about voice notes, and how long in your mind is the perfect voice note? Because there's a lot of debate around how long.
I'd say about 90 seconds.
Really?
Yeah. And in that 90 seconds, it's you delivering like a nice juicy bit of gossip, like a nice nugget, like whether receiving or sending. I would say, because then 90 seconds, or just telling any kind of story, that means you haven't given enough detail that the recipient doesn't then have like sort of questions, follow-up questions. So then it becomes like a nice kind of back and forth. And I find that quite fun. But any shorter than that, I think you don't really, as the listener, you can't really get stuck in. And longer than that, sometimes, I don't have time to listen to this now. You've always got 90 seconds, but you might not have 10 minutes, say. And I have been known to leave 10. I think the longest voice note I've received is probably about 17 minutes.
17 minutes? That's a podcast.
Yeah, that's what we'd call them, like friends. I mean, I think that was also during the pandemic as well.
Yeah, okay, fine.
But we'd be like, oh, podcast. And I would literally like sit down, like I'd be like, I'll save this for like half an hour for an hour, make a cup of tea, and then just sit down and listen to it.
How do you even respond to something like that though? Because when I get friends that send me voice notes,
sometimes I make notes.
Yeah, I make notes. I have to make notes.
Yeah, sometimes I make notes.
I know what to respond to.
Yeah. And I think the thing is that they allow you, it's like you don't necessarily both have to be free for a phone call at the same time, which I think is obviously increasingly harder to do for various reasons. And so I do like that aspect of flexibility, and it's like a whole conversation and story. You can kind of go back and forth, and they're just, quite a funny, but also I find them quite a nice way of fostering kind of intimacy. I think whether it's with friends or like, romantically, I think to be honest, I move things to voice note very quickly, like even with people I don't know, because also I find it quite efficient. So I might be messaging somebody on Instagram about something, maybe even just kind of quite worky. And if it's someone that I kind of know and I'm friendly with, I'll be like, hey, I hope you don't mind a voice note, but here are the answers, that sort of thing, because it's just quicker. So they are also efficient for me. But yeah, I just love a good voice note.
Yeah, and I know what you mean. There is an intimacy about a voice note that I think is sometimes even more intimate than a phone call, because you have time to listen to that person's voice alone and really take in what they're saying and think about how you're going to respond, as opposed to kind of responding off the cuff on the phone. And I think when you are sharing voice notes with someone you've just started dating, it can be quite an exciting way to get to know someone and get to know the tenor of their voice and how they think. And
yeah, definitely. Also, I feel like if somebody's voice isn't good, I'm like, I don't think this is going to go anywhere.
Yeah, I know. I like that. I mean, I don't like voice notes on Hinge or like on dating apps, because I feel like they're just generic voice notes. They're not voice notes that are not sent to me.
So I'm not on the app, so I didn't know you can
do that now.
I sound like such an old fuddy-duddy. So what people have?
People have voice messages on their profile.
Right, okay.
But they're quite weird. It will be like someone describing their typical Sunday or someone describing a joke. And I don't know, there's something really generic and kind of gross about that, because it's just like a rehashed thing that loads of people are obviously listening to. Whereas I think when you start talking to someone, sending a voice note quite early on can seem like quite a jarring thing.
I think it's also like a good, test for men. It's like, well, how kind of confident are you, or how intimidated by this are you? And I think I have used that as a way of like weeding out, where it's like, okay, can you just, I'll be like, tell me a story, or tell me something interesting, like, whatever.
I agree.
And if somebody can kind of be like, yeah, hey, like, it kind of makes me think, okay, this is somebody who's kind of comfortable in themselves. But if somebody's like umming and ahhing, be like, oh my God, I don't know what to say, I find that such a turn off. I'm just like, think of something.
Don't go on the apps, they're rubbish. I hate them.
Yeah.
Good decision. Okay, third love is having written as opposed to writing. Totally understand what you mean by that. But to those of us who are not writers and might be listening, explain why it is that you prefer the act of having written as opposed to actually writing.
Yeah. So obviously, overall, I like writing because I have made it my career and worked very hard to do so. It's not an easy career to, make work. So I do obviously love writing, but I see whenever I'm working on anything, whether it's, short form, long form, it's like a mountain. And that like uphill bit of it, or that like, let's say getting the first draft down is like pushing a boulder uphill sometimes. Not all the time actually, but sometimes it can really feel like that. And it's when that kind of first draft is there and I'm kind of going through editing, tweaking, changing things, that's when it feels like I'm on a bicycle sailing downhill. So I've just switched analogies there, but we're gonna go with it. And that kind of feels fun and interesting, and like that's the bit I like. But sometimes I think basically what I don't like is first drafts. Those are just like brutal. But then every draft after that is kind of like fun and interesting, and like you have like the framework of something to tweak. But sometimes like getting things down like from your head onto paper is just feels like pulling nails. So that's why I say I prefer having written. And obviously the best bit is when you're just like moving a few full stops around and it's just like, oh, this, and like you're happy with what you've written and it feels complete, and that's such a satisfying feeling, because then it's just about, okay, pushing this out in whatever form, whether it's a book or an article, and like engaging with the responses to it. And that is obviously if you feel satisfied with what you've written. So that I think is kind of the sweet spot. But yeah, the first draft for me is always horrible.
But I find it really reassuring, because so many writers I admire, yourself included, feel that way. So like I was listening to Greta Gerwig talking about when she first starts writing a script for something, and she's like, you just hate it. And you think, why am I doing this? You can't write. You're terrible. This is going to be awful. They're going to hate you. What are you doing? And it's like, I think it's because, I don't know if you write this way, but for me, it's like I work out what it is I'm trying to say as I'm saying it. So initially, for me, the first idea that comes down on the page is probably quite basic and probably quite simple.
So basic. And I'm like, if somebody read, like sometimes somebody like a editor or a producer, they'll be like, oh, just send me the trash draft. And I'm like, I can't send you this because you will start to question like the web of lies I've built my entire career on, because the like trash, like vomit draft is so bad.
Yeah.
And so I think some people, their kind of first, pass is more polished, but mine isn't. It's like the sentence stops halfway there and I use really basic words and then I kind of go over it. So that's another thing, like I don't share like early drafts of my work with anyone because I'm like, this is just rubbish and I'd feel embarrassed to share this. So yeah, that phase of writing is difficult, but you just have to push through and then it gets so good. So.
Is there, are there certain subjects that you prefer writing about than others and certain subjects that you hate writing about?
Oh, that's a good question. I think I just don't want to write about the same thing forever and ever. So I definitely sense that, like, let's say my last couple of books have been about, the first one was about careers, second one was about race, the third one was about money. And I kind of hit a limit in terms of finding it interesting to write about that. So funnily enough, your book will come out and then lots of editors, newspapers, magazines will want you to write about that. And like still years on, people will be like, oh, could you write something for us about careers? And I'm like, I'm done with that topic. Yeah. Like I've said everything I have to say about it. And I'm not somebody who just kind of likes repeating themselves or rehashing it. And I think that can be a very comfortable place to be. But if I'm bored of it, I'm just like, that's the worst, to write something that you now feel bored by. And you've said that. So I think things I hate writing about are things that I've written about already a lot. And then I'm like, I can't do this anymore.
Yeah, I know what you mean, because then I think you find yourself just repeating the same ideas.
Yeah, and I'm like, well, I've already phrased it perfectly the first time round, so there's no point in me rehashing of like the same words into a different format. So I find that I tend to kind of hit a ceiling for any specific topic. And for instance, let's say with my money book, for instance, it's a topic I've been thinking about for years. And then, pitch the book, proposal, research it, write it, and then it comes out, do press, do promo. Let's say that process is about 5 years. I'm like, I'm done talking. I've spent 5 years thinking and talking about this subject. It's not that I'm not still interested in it in a more kind of passive way, but I don't necessarily want that to be what I'm working on day to day. Like I want to move on to new things. And I always find it fascinating when I see other writers who like have lifelong careers or certainly have written and focused on a certain topic for much longer than 5 years, because I'm like, how do you not get bored?
Yeah.
Like, I find that really interesting. But for me, that isn't the case.
Yeah, no, me neither. And I think it's just exciting because then you're kind of constantly challenging your brain and challenging yourself to think about new subjects and enter into a new territory. And, like you've just done with your fashion newsletter that I mentioned at the start, which is now every month. So
yes, so it's a monthly newsletter called Add to Wishlist. And it's basically sort of me kind of picking things that I have bought, want to buy, just like fashion picks essentially, but also my thoughts on style and dressing and fashion and shopping and, my approach to it. So it might be how I approach like bargain hunting. So I'm somebody who likes nice clothes. I like designer clothes, but it's like, I can't buy everything full price. So it's like, where am I looking to get a bargain? Like, these are the websites you might have heard of. Here are some deals that I found for you. Like, here are some strategies. For instance, I don't shop during the sales because I find that quite a stressful, like high pressurized time to buy clothes. And I find that in years gone by, I would just make mistakes. So just different ways of thinking about like what you wear and what it says about you and the importance of clothes. So I'll usually kind of have like an introduction of like, I don't know, like 1,000 words. And then it gets into just like links of like, and pictures of things that I think are beautiful and the odd bit of interior stuff. But yeah, it's just, I wanted somewhere to talk about all that stuff that wasn't Instagram, because I think if you do that on Instagram, sometimes it can feel, there's just so much fashion content on Instagram, I think already. And it can feel a little bit like influencery, I think, because people are so used to seeing brand recommendations in the context of them kind of being a bit of a plug or kind of like begging for a freebie kind of thing. I want to make it clear that the stuff I'm recommending is stuff that I genuinely like. And I feel like for whatever reason, people just don't trust that as much on Instagram. Not that I have a problem with, that kind of format, but I just felt like if I'm going to be doing this constantly, I don't want it to just be me like tagging like a million brands, being like, I like this, I like this, I like this. I think people interpret that in quite a negative way. And so having a newsletter kind of just makes it feel a bit more solid.
That's it for today. Thank you so much for listening. And if you are a fan of Love Lives, you can catch us on all major podcast platforms. You can also watch us on independent TV. Follow us on Instagram @Love Lives. And I will see you next time. Thank you. Bye.